Can I have some water?
My 5-year-old grandson asked, staggering into my house after walking for 2 hours in 40-degree heat. His face was flushed red, and sweat was pouring down like a waterfall. Confused, I asked, "Where's your mom?" At that moment, he burst into tears.
She dried up at home.
He sobbed. I rushed to his house, and there I found my daughter, skin and bones, collapsed on the floor. In a panic, I pulled her into my arms and, crying, I called for an ambulance. My husband passed away in an accident when our daughter was 5 years old. People around me often said, "Nancy, why don't you remarry?" as I was left with a young child to raise. But I couldn't bring myself to consider it. I dedicated myself to raising my only daughter, Emma. When she turned 29, she married Jason, who was 2 years older than her. While I felt relieved that my role had finally come to an end, something nagged at me. Jason seemed to care deeply for Emma, but it felt like his affection was a bit excessive. After they got married, the couple rented a house about 20 minutes away by car and started their life together. Within 6 months, Emma found out she was pregnant. I was overjoyed at the thought of finally becoming a grandmother and couldn't wait to meet my grandchild. I believe it was around the time Emma was 8 months pregnant. When I visited her, I noticed a frown on her face, as if she was lost in thought. "What's wrong? You look worried," I asked, concerned. Emma replied,
"Jason works night shifts sometimes, right? I was thinking, what if labor starts when he's not home? It made me feel scared."
It was her first pregnancy, so once she started worrying, one concern led to another. I understand, it's natural to feel anxious. How about coming back home for the final month? Of course, only if Jason's okay with it, I suggested, thinking that being with me might give her some peace of mind. I glanced over at Jason. To my surprise, Jason immediately frowned.
Of course not. In times like this, the couple should stay together and support each other.
He raised his voice more than I had ever heard before. Emma tried to calm him down, saying,
"It's okay. I won't go back to my parents' house. There's also the matter of taking care of our own home."
While she managed to settle the situation, Jason glared at me and muttered,
"Don't say unnecessary things just because you want to be with Emma."
Jason's love for her had always been a bit overwhelming, even from when they first started dating. He seemed incredibly concerned if he couldn't get in touch with her, to the point where he'd call me multiple times out of worry. Still, Emma didn't seem to feel suffocated by his behavior, so I thought it was fine as long as they were happy, and I kept a watchful eye on them. Emma eventually reached her final month of pregnancy and, without returning home, went into labor on a day when Jason happened to have the day off. She gave birth safely. While the baby was in her womb, the little one seemed shy, always covering the important areas with its feet, so the gender wasn't known until the baby was born. It turned out to be a healthy baby boy, whom they named John. He's so adorable. Emma, you really did a great job.
"Thanks, Mom,"
Emma replied, as she lovingly cradled her newborn. I visited her in the hospital to congratulate her, but when I looked to the side, Jason didn't seem as happy. "What's wrong?" I asked, thinking he was probably just tired, since I'd heard he held Emma's hand throughout the entire delivery.
I wanted a girl.
He muttered. Sorry, what did you say? I asked, thinking I must have misheard him.
I said, I didn't want a boy.
He suddenly stood up and raised his voice. You should be thankful that the baby was born healthy, regardless of the gender. I said, shocked. Jason murmured.
Yeah, I know.
But his sulking expression remained. I didn't worry too much at the time, thinking he would grow to love his child as they spent more time together. After Emma was discharged, I started visiting their home more often to help out with housework and taking care of the baby. Then, one day, I was surprised to see Jason ignoring John when he was fussing. He's crying right in front of you. Why aren't you doing anything? I thought to myself. Even when Emma asked,
Could you hold him for a bit?
Jason didn't lift his eyes from his phone and pretended not to hear her. This behavior bothered me, so I brought it up with Emma.
He's still really upset that we didn't have a girl. But I'm sure he'll come around and start being affectionate eventually.
She said. Is that really okay? I asked, concerned. Emma, looking slightly troubled, replied.
Yeah, it's fine.
But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was taking on too much responsibility. Still, by the time John was about 6 months old, Jason had started to change. He took John on walks and bathed him, and I thought he'd finally become a good father. They say men take a bit more time to bond with their kids. Things will be fine from here, I thought, and felt a sense of relief. But that was only for a brief period. Things began to shift again around the time John turned 2. As my grandson grew, Jason's cold attitude returned, and he left all the childcare to my daughter. John was going through his terrible twos at the time, so maybe Jason just couldn't handle it anymore. Concerned, I asked Emma about it.
Jason's just been really busy with work lately and doesn't have the energy. He still loves John,
she said. But being tired doesn't excuse treating your own child coldly, does it? I asked. Emma fell silent, unable to respond to my words. After a while, she quietly said with a sad look,
But John really loves his dad.
Seeing her like that, I realized it wouldn't be right to interfere too much in their family matters. She must have her own thoughts and feelings about all of this. From that point on, I decided to only give advice when Emma came to me and tried to simply watch over them otherwise. John continued to grow quickly, and before I knew it, he had turned 5. Throughout that time, Jason's attitude hadn't changed. He remained indifferent toward John. Yet, my grandson grew into a kind-hearted boy who always helped his mother. After his 5th birthday, due to my catching a cold and Emma's busy schedule, there was a stretch of time when I couldn't see him for a while. It was a day in August. The temperature had risen to 40 degrees Celsius, and the weather forecast warned it would be a dangerously hot day. Thinking it was best not to go outside, I finished my housework and settled into an air-conditioned room to work on my hobby of painting postcards. Suddenly, I heard a soft knock at the door. Tap tap. At first, I thought I might have imagined it, but I decided to check anyway. When I opened the door, there stood John. His face was flushed, and sweat was pouring down like a waterfall. What happened?
Grandma, water. Please.
John gasped. I rushed him inside and quickly gave him a sports drink. As I wiped his sweat with a towel and asked what had happened, I learned that he had walked all the way from his house to mine. For a child his age, that distance would have taken about 2 hours on foot.
I walked through cool spots under the trees and drank water at the park, so I'm okay.
John said. But regardless, it was clear he had been in danger. Where's your mom? I asked. Emma would never let her 5-year-old son wander out alone in the summer heat, so I was concerned. At that moment, tears began to well up in John's eyes.
Mom. She's all dried up at home. She stopped moving.
What?
Grandma, hurry. Please, help her.
I couldn't fully grasp what was happening, but from the way John pulled on my hand, trying to drag me outside, I knew it was serious. I hurried to get to Emma's house. As I drove, I asked John for more details, and what he told me was shocking. No. It can't be. It was hard to believe at first, but all I could think about was getting to Emma as fast as possible, so I kept driving. When we arrived at my daughter's house, John led me by the hand to where his mother was. There, in the living room, I found Emma, lying on the floor, emaciated and covered in bruises. Emma. Are you okay? She didn't respond. Panicked, I immediately called for an ambulance. At the hospital, the doctor's expression was grave as he examined her.
Please. Save her.
In that moment, all I could do was pray. I tried calling my son-in-law to tell him about Emma's condition, but no matter how many times I called, he didn't answer. When I asked John about his father, he said,
Dad hasn't been home for about 2 days.
What in the world had happened to my daughter's family? And who had done this to her? Anger welled up inside me. I knew I had to uncover the truth and find out who was responsible for hurting her. I resolved to take action. The next day, I waited outside Jason's workplace for him to come out. I hadn't been able to reach him all night, so I called his office, and they told me he had gone to work. A few minutes after the workday ended, he emerged, looking rather pleased with himself.
Nancy? What are you doing here?
He asked, his face immediately clouding with annoyance. Ignoring his expression, I walked straight up to him. Jason, have you heard from Emma? I can't reach her.
Oh, she's fine. Actually, she said she's tired of you being overbearing and doesn't want to talk to you. Are you two having a fight?
He replied calmly, almost indifferently. But, of course, I knew he was lying after seeing my daughter's condition the day before. If that's how he wanted to play, then I could play along too. I pretended to be shocked, lowering my head. That can't be.
You're too controlling for someone with a grown daughter. If you're calling me and showing up at my workplace just because she isn't picking up, maybe that's why she's avoiding you.
He said, smirking with a condescending tone. I met his gaze and said firmly, Don't lie to me. I know everything.
Excuse me? What do you mean by that?
John walked all the way to my house yesterday, in the heat, asking me to help his mom. When I got there, Emma was lying on the floor, thin as a rail, covered in bruises.
Oh, wow, that's terrible.
Maybe there was a break-in while I was away.
His voice was exaggerated, full of mock surprise as he looked directly at me. Oh really? Weird, because John said you hit Emma before you left. At that, Jason's face stiffened. I think you can already guess the truth. The person responsible for what happened to Emma was none other than Jason himself. The shocking story John had told me in the car confirmed this. As we talked, a few of Jason's coworkers started glancing over curiously. Naturally, this wasn't an accident. I was intentionally speaking loudly enough for them to overhear everything about what Jason had done. But that's just between us. Realizing what I was doing, Jason scratched his head nervously, shooting me a quick glance.
What?
John said that? You know, he tends to make up wild stories. You shouldn't believe everything a kid says.
He raised his voice dramatically, probably hoping to make an impression on the onlookers. You did it, didn't you? I know everything, I said firmly.
I love Emma. There's no way I would ever hurt her.
He replied with feigned confidence.
You're making baseless accusations, and I won't stand for it.
He kept up his act, but I wasn't backing down. I pulled my phone out of my bag and started a video, holding it up for Jason to see. Still think you can lie your way out of this? I asked.
What?
His mouth hung open as he stared at the screen, unable to look away. The video showed him treating John coldly, saying cruel things to him.
Damn it! That video still exists?
He muttered under his breath, clearly surprised. Once I saw he had quieted down a bit, I decided it was time to move forward with his punishment. Emma couldn't take the way you treated your own child anymore, so she started gathering evidence for a divorce, didn't she?
How do you know about this?
And when you found out she was planning to leave you, that's when you hit her. I pressed him further, stepping closer as he retreated in silence. My words caused a stir among the employees nearby, who had been watching the scene unfold. Realizing the attention he was getting, Jason suddenly snapped back to the moment.
No! No! That's not true!
He said, desperately trying to correct the situation.
It's discipline. That's what it is. It's normal for parents to want their children to grow up properly.
Then, with a sneer, he added.
And as for hitting Emma, that's just something you made up in your head.
He laughed at me, his arrogance seeping through. There was no getting through to him with words alone, so I pulled out a document and handed it to him. Enough. What about this? Jason looked at the paper, reading aloud the title.
A medical report?
That's right. It says here Emma had broken bones and was severely dehydrated. Isn't that clear enough? Jason was visibly sweating, a nervous drop forming on his forehead.
But she's alive, right?
He asked, wiping his brow. The fact that you can say something like that so casually is disgusting. She was in critical condition. You need to take responsibility for what your actions have caused. Thanks to the doctor's efforts, Emma had managed to pull through and was now stable enough to speak. That day, John had stayed at the hospital, insisting,
I want to stay with Mom.
The doctor said the force used to hurt her must have been quite strong. Jason stared blankly, as if lost in thought. But after a moment, he suddenly burst out laughing.
It's all her fault. I didn't do anything wrong.
He began speaking as if reveling in his delusion. He admitted that the reason he had wanted a child in the first place was because he found Emma's face attractive, and he hoped for a cute daughter who looked just like her. When John was born, and he realized it was a boy, he was disappointed.
But for about the first year, he still looked enough like Emma, so I figured I could manage. I even made an effort. I bathed him a few times.
Then why did you start treating him so cruelly? I asked.
Isn't it obvious? As he started looking more like me, his face got more masculine, and he stopped being cute. I couldn't stand it anymore.
What? I was speechless, horrified by his utterly absurd reason for being cold toward his own son.
That's why I suggested we put John up for adoption and just try again. We could keep having kids until a girl was born. Simple, right?
He said this with a smug smile, as if his plan was the most logical thing in the world. The way he spoke so casually about such a terrifying idea made my blood run cold. But I couldn't let my fear show. I had to stay strong. Taking a deep breath, I steadied myself. Of course, Emma refused. Any decent person would. How could she ever accept such a vile proposal? It was at that moment Emma had decided to leave Jason. She started documenting everything and preparing for divorce, all in secret. One day, however, Jason accidentally found a hidden camera in the living room. To make matters worse, he discovered a completed divorce form with Emma's name filled out in one of the drawers.
I was shocked. When I confronted her, she actually said she was planning to leave me.
Enraged by Emma's intention to divorce him, Jason had lashed out at her, shouting,
I love you so much.
Blinded by anger, he hit her repeatedly, screaming for her to repent as he stormed out of the house. Before leaving, he made sure Emma couldn't call for help by taking her phone. This had all happened just 2 days before John came to get me for help. The video I showed you earlier was from another hidden camera Emma had installed. It seems she had been thorough in her preparations.
How sneaky. It's all her fault for loving John too much.
What's wrong with that? He's her child. It's only natural.
That's the problem. He's always sticking close to her, just like Emma.
He said this without batting an eye, as if his jealousy was perfectly reasonable. I was left speechless. Jason's words weren't the thoughts of a responsible parent. They were nothing more than petty jealousy. He couldn't accept that Emma's priority was John, not him. On the other hand, despite the violence she endured, Emma tried to maintain her role as a mother. Even though she was in pain, she smiled through it, telling John,
"I'm fine."
She continued taking care of him until one day, her pain finally became unbearable, and she collapsed. For 2 days after Jason's attack, Emma had been unable to eat or drink anything. She was severely weakened, and a diagnosis later revealed she was suffering from extreme dehydration. In the end, it was John's decision to seek me out that saved Emma's life. Emma plans to report you to the police and speak to a lawyer.
What? It's just a marital issue. Why involve the police?
No, this is a serious crime. What you've done will be judged under the law. You need to face the consequences. Finally, Jason seemed to realize the gravity of his situation.
No! I didn't mean any harm. Please! You have to convince Emma. If you talk to her, maybe she'll change her mind.
Jason started begging, moving closer to me, but I shoved him away. Don't touch me.
But I didn't.
He muttered incoherently, slumping in defeat. But this wasn't over yet. I had one last card to play. For someone who claims to love Emma, you've done some pretty horrible things.
Huh?
His dumbfounded reaction was almost laughable. I pulled out several photos and thrust them in front of him. His eyes went wide as he stared at them, muttering nonsense. You didn't think we'd know this much, did you? Even about your affair. The photos were proof of his infidelity. Emma had done a thorough investigation of Jason, and she had uncovered his affair with another woman. She had kept this evidence as part of her divorce preparations. After you stormed out that day, you went straight to her place, didn't you? I couldn't understand how he could betray Emma and John so cruelly, only to turn around and have an affair. On top of the medical bills, Emma plans to sue you for the affair as well. And don't forget child support for John. Hearing the word money snapped Jason back to reality.
Wait! Please help me!
He tried to cling to me again, but I had nothing left to say to him. I turned and left. As I walked away, I heard some employees who had been watching the whole scene applaud, while others jeered at Jason, saying, "How pathetic." In the end, Emma and Jason's divorce was finalized. She filed a police report, and after being questioned, Jason was arrested. Eventually, they settled out of court. Jason was hit with a $100,000 bill covering compensation for his affair, medical expenses, and child support. He had to borrow money from various sources to pay it off. Since the confrontation had taken place outside the company, someone had recorded it and posted it on social media. The video quickly went viral, and Jason's name was soon identified. The scandal led to him being fired from his job, and he ended up unemployed. The last I heard, he was working odd jobs day and night to pay off his debts. Emma recovered from her injuries and moved in with me along with John. Day by day, John has been getting his energy back, and he's taken to looking after his mom with such care that it brings joy to everyone around him. From now on, I'll do everything in my power to prioritize Emma and John's health and happiness. How did you like today's story? Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. and I'll see you in the next video.